Good evening and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. I'm afraid we had a wee bit of a technical issue, which seems to be quite funny considering I'm on the hot seat this evening, so please bear with us and we will get the show up and running. And I will introduce my fabulous guests that I have this evening with me. On my right hand side, I have the fabulous Andrew Wilson from All Under One Banner. How are you doing, Andrew?
Hi Sam, I'm doing well, thank you. It's great to see you in the hot seat this evening.
Oh, the nerves are going. The nerves are going. And on my right, I have Councillor Colm Merrick from the East Renfrewshire. Is that correct, Colm?
That's correct, Sam. Good evening to yourself.
And how are you doing?
Doing very well, thanks, Sam. Yeah, it's great to be on the show and.
Well, welcome to the show. And what we're going to do is go on with the coronavirus update and then we'll carry on with the rest of this evening's stories. Now, as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 901,667 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional test centres. Of these, 853,959 were confirmed negative. 47,708 were positive. There were 993 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. There was also, unfortunately, one new reported death of people who had tested positive today. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases. Not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those symptoms will be tested. All those with the symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 754 were in hospital last night, 61 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 2,610. This number only includes those who have died in hospital and having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show 43,726 patients who have tested positive for the COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 80 since yesterday. This number refers to the deaths in all settings and not just the hospitals. Now, if you would like to join in the conversation here at Broadcast Scotland, please do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and use the hashtag Scotland@7. Now, as everybody knows, I'm normally a guest on the show and I love reading everyone's tweets. So please tweet and join in tonight's show. Now, I'm going to carry on with tonight's first story, and it's about Wales going into national 2-week firebreak COVID lockdown. A temporary national lockdown will be imposed in Wales, the Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford has announced. The Welsh Government believes a 2-week firebreak from Friday at 6 p.m. until Monday, 9th of November, is vital to help bring the virus under control. About 2.3 million people in Wales are already living under local lockdown rules, 15 of Wales' 22 counties plus Bangor and Llanelli. The Labour-led Welsh Government has also banned people from travelling into Wales from Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas in other parts of the UK. But the Government believes it needs to go further. It argues that a sharp lockdown now will give it and the NHS in Wales breathing space ahead of a difficult winter. Everyone in Wales will be required to stay at home and work from home where possible. Workers in critical jobs and those for whom working from home is not possible are allowed out. Non-essential shops, tourism and hospitality businesses will have to close, except for takeaways along with community centres, libraries and places of worship, other than for funerals and weddings. Now, I'm going to come to Councillor Colm Merrick. Now, Mark Drakeford had said that the children were the Welsh Government's top priority. He said childcare would stay open, primary and special needs schools would reopen after the half term. Now, do you think the Welsh First Minister, Mark Drakeford, is basically making the correct decision by jumping into this, or well, I know it's not jumping in, but making this decision, then going into this fire break lockdown?
Okay, thanks, Sam. I think that Mark Drakeford and his cabinet will have deliberated a lot over this, and they will have followed the science, one has to assume, and the science is telling them this is what is required right now. And also projecting ahead, it seems as if there could be a very difficult winter ahead, which is something we should all be a little bit concerned about, to say the least. And I think Mark Drakeford is doing what if the science is telling them this, there is no other choice. But does seem quite drastic. We're going right back to where we were in March of this year, and that's something that should concern us all. But if this gets us out of, gets the Welsh on a clear path in 2 weeks' time, then this is what's required. But for children, obviously, children come off the worst in these situations, and that's what we want to ensure, that education keeps going, that parents are free to do what they have to do. I know we heard all sorts of problems with lockdown, with parents trying to work from home while the children were at home, and so on. And the blended learning in those days wasn't quite right. So we hope that that's better going ahead, that we've learned lessons from the first lockdown, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly, Colin. Andrew, now they're saying that they're hoping the fire break gives them some time to build up a resilient test and trace and isolation system in Wales. Do you think that is going to work and get their test and trace up and running properly?
Well, I think, Sam, it's certainly important to note that the Welsh Government are being clear that they're going to try and make the very best use of the time that's available to them to attend to the most important things, principally of which is the Welsh version of the test and trace systems that each of the nation's administrations run, and so I think that's an understandable thing to do, and I think it's the right thing to do, and I think it's going to help. I think everyone has been saying since the beginning of 2020, since the beginning of the COVID crisis, that testing is key, especially whilst there is no vaccine available to us. So the approach that the Welsh Government is taking is the right one. It's understandable, and I think it's an approach which I hope we will see other administrations across the UK begin to take. I say that because it's been very obvious that the decisions taken at a more local level than Whitehall have been more successful and are better calibrated and configured to the needs of the people in whichever of the component parts of the UK they've been identified. And so I think the Welsh Government is taking a timely lead on these matters, and after an awful lot of the hot air that was shed in the summer when it was suggested that there might be border controls between Scotland and England, that the Welsh Government has introduced them and has policed them. As I understand it, the police in Gwent have stopped and challenged hundreds of drivers over the past weekend, asking them where they're going and why. And it indicates that the devolved administrations are perfectly right to consider border controls and should do so, and that they are able to introduce them. So I think there's a big lesson for Belfast and Edinburgh in what we're seeing from Cardiff. And I'll also plug very briefly, because of the way in which the nations are approaching these things and a different way from what we've heard from Westminster, All Under One Banner is hosting a Zoom call on Wednesday evening with representatives from Yes Cymru and Yes for Unity, which are Welsh and Irish independence organisations, because we think it's really important to look at the responses to COVID from each of the devolved administrations and in each of the countries, and to work together on it.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I'm hoping to listen in to the Zoom meeting because it sounds very interesting. It'll be good to see. Right, moving on to the next story. The Scottish Green Party says the Scottish Government cannot rely on UK testing system. Now, responding to reports of capacity issues and delays with the UK Government's Lighthouse testing facility in Glasgow, Scottish Greens health spokesperson Alison Johnson MSP said, "It's been clear from some time that the UK Government's privatised testing system is not fit for purpose. Now, once again, this shambles has left us with no idea about how many new cases there are in Scotland. The Scottish Government has been telling us for weeks it plans to move testing for home care workers out of the Lighthouse labs and into the NHS Scotland facilities. But on Friday, the First Minister admitted it would take until December for this to happen. It's clear that the UK testing system cannot be relied upon. Once again, urge the Scottish Government to urgently increase its own capacity using the great expertise available in Scottish NHS and university labs." Now, Councillor Collum, what do you make of this? Do you think we should be making use of our own NHS Scotland facilities?
Well, Sam, I think we should be making use of whatever we can at the minute, but I know that the Scottish Government is urgently trying to get to the bottom with the UK Government of what it is that's causing the delays. And so far we think it's mainly due to demand from out with Scotland, probably the volume of demand. And I think another point to remember, or that may be important, is that most of these tests are still well within the time frame, the 24-hour, 48-hour time frame. But clearly, testing, as Andrea said in an earlier chat, is crucial to how we beat this virus. So, in terms of the care home workers, the staff, we are going to continue to route those through our own NHS Scotland facilities, just because that's the best way forward at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. We basically testing is the key of this. Andrew, and what do you make of this? What's your opinion on the Lighthouse facilities and moving testing more into the NHS facilities?
Well, Sam, I think the suggestions being made by the Scottish Greens are not unreasonable in the circumstances. We know that much of the UK government's response to COVID has been troubled, not least because it's been handed over to their mates and their families and their chums, and hasn't operated through the NHS in England and Wales. We know that the test and trace system in Scotland, which is not outsourced and which is being done, as I understand it, by traditional track and trace medical experts in the Scottish NHS, that component is working relatively well. And certainly I'm aware of people who have been tracked and traced or who have successfully used the Scottish Government app. So that element seems to be working. However, at the same time, especially in the case of devolved nations like Scotland, the resources, both financial and people, are finite at the moment. And the Scottish Government's response to the coronavirus crisis is in some respect limited. Difficult decisions have to be taken because the amount of money that Scotland has to spend on this is controlled and is capped by Westminster. And I think this demonstrates again that there is a very strong argument for, in these exceptional circumstances, the Scottish Government and the other devolved administrations to be given borrowing powers in order that we can raise money and fund and direct the response to the crisis in the way that is best for the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, definitely. Now, to move on to our next story, experts say Boris Johnson's thin EU deal will cause major economic upset. The narrow EU deal sought by Boris Johnson will act as a dead weight on Britain's ability to trade. The former boss of Brexit Department has warned amid raising concerns that the country remains dangerously ill prepared for such an outcome. The negotiations in the EU remain stuck this weekend after Downing Street told EU negotiators not to bother making a planned trip to London without offering a fundamental change of approach. The Prime Minister stopped short of calling off talks, which will continue this week in a sign of severity of the business unease. More than 70 trade associations and professional bodies today have issued an extraordinary joint plea to both sides to carve out a deal. However, there are concerns within the government and the industry that the dire threat of a no-deal outcome has masked the impact of a thin EU deal on trade. While a deal will remove tariffs on trade, significant non-tariff barriers will be imposed, adding serious costs on manufacturers and the practical difficulties for hauliers, while the UK's largest services sector is also expected to be subject to new barriers. Philip Rycroft, who ran the Brexit department until last year, said that the negotiators were essentially hammering out the extent of the new barriers to trade. Sorry, I need to put my teeth back in. Councillor Collum, now, what do you make of this? We've spoken about this on the show quite a lot over the recent year regarding a no deal. What's your take on what's happening at the moment between Downing Street and the EU?
I think it's the next episode in chaos and the inability to negotiate, the inability to be respectful. This UK government, this Tory government, can't even keep deals that they make with themselves. We have an international agreement being broken on the path here. We have all kinds of problems and nothing is getting better, whether they call it a thin deal or an Australia deal or a Canadian deal, whatever, we know that there's going to be chaos and it's already started. So even with any deal they get, it's going to be tough, whether it's thin, fat, or just about pleasantly plump. We don't really know. These names come up. We know that Alok Sharma admitted that the difference between an Australia deal and no deal was semantics. So we do deserve a little bit better than semantics from the Tories at this point, but we don't seem to be getting that. I think to follow on from some of the things Andrew said, perhaps we could get the four nations of the UK to negotiate their own deals with Europe, and I think we would do an awful lot better. But this is extremely worrying when 70 trade organisations and other professional bodies are writing to the government to say, please carve out some kind of deal. And this is just about making it less worse. We know it's bad, no matter what they come up with.
Yeah, we certainly do, Colin. And as I say, we've been talking about this quite a lot, and it's quite scary seeing what's happening and it all unfolding. Now, Andrew, I'm going to come to you. Now, as you know, as a regular guest on the show, we have spoke about this quite a lot. What do you make about this with the recent thin EU deal?
Well, I think the first point that Colin was making is absolutely right. To attempt to use the term Australia deal is a fig leaf because the reality is it's no deal. They might as well call it a Narnia deal or a Mordor deal. It makes as much sense. The other point that Colin makes, which is that whatever deal it is that they strike, it is going to be worse than the current deal that we have by definition. And so the kinds of challenges that people and businesses and organisations are going to suffer as a result of this is becoming clearer and clearer by the day. I think it's ironic that the current negotiations are said to have foundered over fishing, an industry that we know the Tories threw away the last time there were serious negotiations with the EU. And the second aspect they're fighting about is the level playing field. Now, it seems really ironic, given that probably the last thing the cabal of Brexit jihadists who are inhabiting the Tory party in London want is a level playing field. With a level playing field, how will they be able to sell off assets and support their chums and their friends in the way that I think it's pretty clear that they intend? So the irony is not lost on us of the situation that they find themselves in. I think the reports that I've heard that Johnson and Gove told the EU not to bother turning up for negotiations this week, not to bother. That resonates very strongly with me, that they have no intention of obtaining a deal at all. And the kind of chaos that we are going to see, it manifests itself in a myriad of ways. At one end, at one extreme, I was reading this morning of the calculation of the excess human waste that the authorities in Kent will have to deal with as a result of the thousands of lorries that are going to be stationary, parked on concrete holding areas across the county. So the implications, large and small, of the extremist deal that Johnson and Gove are pursuing are only beginning to unfold, and it's beginning to look like it's going to be a really tough January for everybody.
Yeah, it certainly does, Andrew, doesn't it? Now to move on to the next story, again about Brexit. Extreme Brexit plans, an act of disaster Toryism. Michael Gove today attacked the EU's firm negotiating stance before changing his tune after Michael Barnier tweeted during his statement. Gove was explaining to the government's suspension of talks with the EU following the bloc summit at the end of last week, when Barnier tweeted, "I just spoke to David Frost. I confirmed that the EU remains available to intensify talks in London this week on all subjects based on legal texts. We now wait for the UK's reaction." Gove then told the Commons that he welcomed the constructive move and would look forward with optimism to resuming talks. Responding to Gove's statement today, SNP MP Pete Wishart said, "The extreme approach to Brexit talks adopted by Boris Johnson's government is an act of disaster Toryism." At the same time as the EU's chief Brexit negotiator continues to extend his hand and state that the EU remains available to intensify talks, Michael Gove shamelessly continues to pass the blame for the breakdown in talks onto the EU. The impact of either a bad deal or a no deal, coupled with the deep hit to the economy from the coronavirus crisis, risks delivering a severe blow to the businesses, jobs and people's living standards across the UK. It's staggering that in the midst of a global pandemic, deep recession, mass job losses and business closures, that the UK government is telling people to prepare for a no-deal exit. Now, Colm, coming back to you. Now, they're saying, again, it's all about this new deal. They're talking about over 70 EU business groups representing more than 7 million workers warned the UK government against its no-deal Brexit threats. Now, carrying on from the last story, how do you see this panning out? I dread to ask. I'm sorry, Colm.
Well, it really, the Tories just don't seem to be able to grasp what's happening here, and I don't know why that is, because the EU have stuck to the same stance. The withdrawal agreement that they signed, that was agreed and dealt with. It's the UK government that, as soon as the EU tries to meet, because the EU does not want Britain to self-harm to the extent that it is, or the UK, it's certainly, and people across the UK and in the four nations of the UK don't want their government, their central UK government, to self-harm, but they seem hell-bent on doing that. And it goes beyond comprehension at times. We can see for ourselves, we're talking 27 countries against one here, and the 27 hold firm because they're used to dealing on an equal footing with other countries, whereas the UK seems to be immature. The UK Tories seem to be immature in their dealings with other people and other nations, and I think we see that on many aspects of modern political life, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But let's hope somebody smart gets in there soon.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. And Andrew, I mean, basically, they seem as if what they're doing is putting the interests of the Tory party first. And they're gambling with the economic and social interests of Scotland and the UK. How do you think this is going to affect Scotland come January?
Well, Sam, I think we see again that Pete Wishart has an interesting turn of phrase in the House when he's asking questions, although I'd argue that disaster Toryism is a bit of a tautology. I think the last 10 years at least have shown that Toryism is synonymous with disaster,
Yeah.
and or at least disaster for all but the chosen few of the bigots, toffs, money-minded machine men, faded entertainers, and former newspaper columnists who inhabit what's left of the Tory party nowadays. They may get away with something, but it's going to be a disaster for the rest of us. So I think the performance of the Tory party over the last 10 years are the UK's credit rating has now dropped to AA3, the lowest it's been that I can ever remember. There's national debt at a level we've never seen before. The wages across the UK are in a completely unsustainable place, and in every and in international relations, the UK's standing is probably again at the lowest it's been for as long as I can remember. So the every aspect of what the Tory party has done has rocked to the UK. It shows just how much of a disaster that their policies are, and I think it's only going to get worse. They have a majority of 80 from the various pieces of legislation that they've brought forward lately to do with the internal market bill, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit later, but also around about the covert security legislation that's going through. It's clear that they think that they are drunk on power and that they can do whatever they want. And that's a real concern for the people of Scotland, because we know that a Tory government doesn't care what the people of Scotland want at all.
Yes, certainly. Right, to move on to the next story, again another Brexit story. Brexit negotiations expected to resume despite UK Gov rhetoric. Brussels expects the Brexit negotiations to resume within days, as Michael Gove confirmed that despite Downing Street's tough rhetoric, the door remained ajar on re-engagement. The EU's chief negotiator, Michael Barnier, will hold a video conference call with his British counterpart, David Frost, this afternoon to discuss the structure of future talks. While it's probable that Downing Street will need to appear tough by pushing back against an immediate resumption of the trade and security negotiations, sources on both sides expect the current suspension to be short. The Confederation of British Industry, the CBI, and Business Europe, the body representing the European industry, have urged the British government and the European Commission to show leadership and swiftly return to the negotiation table. I'll need to stick the teeth back in. Now is the time for the historic political leadership. Read a joint statement by the CBI and organisations representing 190,000 businesses and 7 million employees within the UK. With compromise and tenacity, a deal can be done. Now, Councillor Collum, what do you make of this on the expect to basically resume the negotiations with the EU?
Well, I think the EU have been very, very patient with the UK government. And again, the EU do not want harm to befall any country, but eventually it's up to the UK government to face up to its responsibilities. They have dragged us down this path. They're now dragging us over a cliff. They seem to be climbing up a ladder before we jump off that cliff. But they really... it can't get any worse, or can it? They just have to find a way to negotiate the best for all the people of the UK, because they're in the driving seat here, and to consult with the constituent parts of the UK, all of whom see what's coming here. As Andrew said, on top of a pandemic, what is it we're really facing?
Yeah.
More chaos. And I read something recently where Boris Johnson was considering resigning next spring after visiting this upon millions of people. I don't think he should be allowed to resign next spring. No, we need to get they need to get serious about negotiations fast and get the best deal that they possibly can, which again, as we've said before, is going to be horrific.
Yeah, definitely, Colin. And Andrew, there remains a further 4 weeks when there could be worthwhile negotiations before a deal would need to be ready for the ratification process. Now, do you think they're going to be able to get a deal?
I would like to think that there will be some form of an agreement, but I think, as we've been saying throughout the programme this evening, the likelihood is that if there is any deal, it will be extraordinarily thin. And that means that many of the challenges and problems that we are foreseeing and we are predicting just now will still be visited upon us, notwithstanding that there is a deal. So I think there's a really significant challenge there for everybody. I think the EU and its operations, as we know, is always meticulous, is always methodical, is always an experienced and skilled negotiator, and we've seen all of that. I'm impressed but not surprised to hear Combe channeling President Macron, who I think has just said that it is not the role of the 27 members of the EU to sort out the UK's problems, and he's quite right in that. But I think there will be a determination on the part of the EU to obtain a deal and to have it ratified, no matter the extremes that will take to be done. Because, as you say, we're now in the weeks and days leading up to the cliff edge that Brexit Day will mean, and so I continue to be of the view that the EU will try, but it is really difficult for them to negotiate in the face of, as Colm says, a UK government which has pre-announced its intention to break international law and to break the withdrawal agreement that has been signed, with all of the ramifications that brings, including on the island of Ireland, and a UK that appears that the UK that is run by columnists, and my apologies for banging on about this, but the lack of experience and training and professionalism and responsibility, which is demonstrated at the very top tier in the cabinet, and that is because they are in the cabinet because they swore personal fealty to Boris to get Brexit done and nothing else. The lack of talent and the lack of capacity and the lack of experience in the cabinet means that all they have to offer is huffing and puffing and posturing, and that makes a negotiation really very difficult.
Yes, certainly it does, doesn't it, Andrew? Right, we'll move on to our next story now. The unprecedented breadth of opposition to the UK government's internal market bill. The UK government's law-breaking internal market bill has come under an unprecedented breadth of opposition over its threat to devolution, blatant power grab plans and moves to break international law. Ahead of the House of Lords debating the bill today, a rare joint letter from the leaders of the UK's Anglican churches warned that the bill creates a dangerous precedent and is particularly disturbing in relation to the impact on the Good Friday Agreement. The leaders go on to say that if the bill is pushed into law without consent of the devolved governments, then it will be further undermine trust and goodwill between the governments. It follows a report published today by the Centre of Constitutional Change, which concluded that the bill contains no provisions to guarantee high regularity, my teeth are gone again, in standards. Instead, it provides scope for businesses to sell products in a part of the UK that do not meet the standards set by the government in that part of the bill. Now, Colm, what do you make of the internal market bill? We've spoke about this quite a lot on the show. So, what's your take on the internal market bill?
Well, what's happening with the Tory wrecking ball at the minute. So much for a partnership of equals, because this is anything but a partnership of equals. Not one of the devolved administrations agrees with this. I'm still searching, along with others, to find one example of where devolution is harmful to internal trade within the UK. We cannot find it. This is a power grab. This is a devolution destroying. This is making regions of us all. And it is the biggest threat to democracy in modern times on these islands. I think it's very thinly disguised as an internal market bill, but it is obviously to pave the way for Frankenstein food that we keep hearing about, because
Yeah.
that's an absolute reality. Although I think when we come back to the withdrawal agreement and think about that, it's not the fairy at the top of the tree that makes the decisions here, and certainly in North America, that's not the case. It's the roots and branches of that tree, and I am entirely optimistic that the roots and branches of the Congress in America will not allow some kind of cheap NHS sale to go ahead at the behest of a Johnson or Cummings cabal in London.
Yeah. And Andrew, one of the things about the internal market bill is the fact it could impact on key devolved issues, such as, for instance, in Wales, their ban on single-use plastic. So if this goes ahead, we all know it's going to it's a power grab, but how do you think it's going to affect us in Scotland in terms of our own policies and legislation that we have got in place that could be now overrun by the UK government?
Well, I think, Sam, the basic principle of devolution being that everything is devolved unless it's retained means
Yes.
that for people in Scotland, if you breathe the air or drink the water or live in a building or have any interest at all in the future of your families and your neighbours, it means that you're extremely concerned by what is in the internal market bill, because it clearly has the intention of allowing or seeking to allow the UK government to demolish structures which exist here, both structures which have been set up on political and democratic grounds because they have been manifesto promises by the Scottish government, which people have voted for. That will be torn up. And in addition to that, the very fundamental principle and components of the Treaty of Union, which guaranteed the continuation of a separate Scottish legal system, indicated a separate Scottish church, and set up and made it important that such things as education continued to be distinct and to be run for Scotland. All of these things will be attacked by the UK government. And so not just the current devolved settlement, which we have enjoyed for the last 20 years, it is being torn up, but the very foundation of the union, which these Tories say is so precious to them, it too is being attacked. The unlimited powers which ministers, not a parliament or a government, but ministers are looking to take to themselves in the internal markets bill is a recipe for a catastrophic approach, which both at the high level, as I'm talking about the devolution settlement and the constitutional affairs, but at a day-to-day level on the streets of Scotland, people will see their lives negatively affected as UK ministers start to flex the muscles that they have given themselves in this internal markets bill. And just as an example, we should be watching very carefully to identify and predict their plans to privatise Scottish Water as soon as they can get their hands on it.
Oh, definitely. That's one for the watching. Right, now to move on to the next story. Scottish Government has called for urgent meeting on replacement of the EU Structural Fund. Investment Minister Ivan McKee is urging the UK Government to reverse its decision to cancel talks on the scheme which replaced the EU Structural Funds. A planned meeting with Housing, Communities and Local Government Minister Luke Hall was cancelled last month, and now Mr McKee has been told it will not take place until after the UK Government's Comprehensive Spending Review, which is expected to contain full details of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. It follows concern expressed by the devolved nations at the lack of information on how the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, that is a tongue twister, will work and what its value will be. The Scottish Government is seeking an assurance that funding decisions will be fully devolved, matching the way the EU structural funds are currently managed. Mr McKee has written to Mr Hall asking that their meeting is reinstated as a matter of urgency. Now, Colm, does this surprise you that once again the Scottish Government's having to sit and wait on the UK Government?
I think there's two aspects to this. I think the UK Government are going to make certain that they can do whatever they like, and they're not remotely interested in what was on in Scotland, just what they can get out of it. And of course, it adds to the weight of evidence that in Scotland we have to have another way out of this, so to speak, and where we have the right to consult and decide our own future, because I don't think the answers for Scotland lie in London anymore, or with the Tories in London. I think the answers to Scotland lies within our own cities and our own towns, and even the Scottish Trade Union Congress has said that the only way forward at this point is that the people of Scotland are given that right to decide their own future. So no, I don't think we'll get any kind of fair deal, any kind of just deal from the central UK government as it currently stands.
Yeah, thank you, Colm. Now I'm going to move on to the next story regarding the US election result. There is concern in Europe over the possibility of disputed US election result. With less than 3 weeks until the US presidential election, the European capitals are concerned about the risk of a disputed outcome and the impact it would have in the United States and abroad. While Democrat candidate Joe Biden leads in the opinion polls, the 2016 election produced a split between the popular vote and the Electoral College. Analysts say that remains possible on the November the 3rd. With Trump advocating on whether he would accept a peaceful transfer of power if he loses, and suggesting the Supreme Court may have to decide the winner. The risk of a contested result is significant. One British bookmaker is offering 9-4 odds that Trump will lose the popular vote but will be re-elected. Odds imply that 69% of probability. A poll of global fund managers by the Bank of America found 60% expected the result to be disputed. In major European capitals, where many quietly hope the election will produce a change of president and a shift in the US policy on issues from climate to trade, NATO and the Iran nuclear deal, caution prevails. German officials have been thinking through the implications for months since Trump raised doubts about whether he would accept the outcome. We analyse what could happen in different scenarios, one said. Now, Andrew, I'm going to come to you first on this story. Do you think Trump will accept the outcome of the election if it doesn't go his way?
Sam, I think that probably depends on just what the outcome of the election is. We know nowadays that US elections are very close. And that the situation is made worse by the electoral college system that they have, which, because of the elections are so close, it seems to me to serve only to pull the foundation away from any democratic authority or any democratic mandate which a president who has lost the popular vote but who then becomes president would have, and that in turn, I think it plays to Trump's base, because it polarizes things even more in a country which is clearly astonishingly divided after all this time along issues of race and politics. The notion of there being an election which is not clear cut and which leads to the Trump attempting to cling to power will serve only to make those divisions deeper. And as we know, in the US, when those divisions are taken onto the streets, people get killed. So it causes me a grave amount of concern. I've seen messages from friends in Texas overnight who are clearly starting to, and who have done all that they can do during the Trump years, but are clearly becoming very concerned about the possibility of another Trump term. And certainly, bookmakers showing up. When I read the story that showed with the quoted the odds at 9-4, my heart sank at the prospect, because as we know, the kind of chaos and division that Trump brings, which is it's his raison d'etre, it's the apprentice writ large onto a national canvas. The chaos that Trump brings really only suits con men like Trump and other disaster capitalists. Vladimir Putin, it definitely suits, and it probably only helps the lawyers. Although I'm bound to say, most of the lawyers who've come into Trump's circle over the last few years are either now in jail or are definitely heading to jail. So I can't see that it serves very many people at all, apart from possibly the president's bank account and Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. And Colm, now how do you think this is going to affect the UK government, who are trying to do a trade deal with Washington, with a potential no-deal Brexit in January?
Well, I think the UK is self-harming as Trump is, but the prospect of an unfettered Trump and some of the idea of him not needing to get re-elected again if he gets another 4-year term is truly terrifying, because we've seen what he's like when he does still have to at least appeal to democracy at some point. But just to come back on a wee point, it's interesting, a lot of Americans don't count their first day of independence when George Washington became president. It was the handover of power. It was after his first term that they then started celebrating independence, because democracy has to be handed back to the people and back to the people they elect. So for Trump to cast that to the side and just prepare to bring into question whether it's in question or not, and I agree with Andrew, there has to be a system where this becomes more foolproof. But Trump plays with the very democracy itself, And I think not only for the UK, I think Donald Trump, unfortunately, has destabilized the world in many ways. We mentioned the Iranian nuclear prohibition deals and what was going on there, and this trade war with China. The way he goes about his business is, again, that immature, childish school playground bully type of way, and that's not the way the world can work if it's to be more coherent and better for all our peoples.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there, Colm. Right, to move on to our next story. The SNP call for MPs to protect families and the vulnerable. Ahead of the immigration bill returning to the House of Commons this afternoon, the SNP's Shadow Immigration Minister has urged the Tory government to accept amendments designed to protect families and the most vulnerable, including refugees, asylum seekers with links to the UK. Stuart MacDonald MP has called for MPs from across the House to consider 3 things when voting on the Lord's amendments to the Immigration and Social Security Coordination EU bill. 1. How does it treat families in the immigration and asylum system? 2. Will it protect the most vulnerable? And 3. Does it take into account the legitimate concerns? The SNP is calling on MPs to stand by the amendments made by the House of Lords, which aim to protect families and keep them together, and ensure the care sector is not crippled, support some of the most vulnerable groups in society, including children. People in the asylum system are victims of modern-day slavery and enable EU citizens already here to easily prove their status to avoid another Windrush generation. Now, Colm, the SNP has opposed the bill, which ends free movement people, and it drowns businesses in red tape and tens, and probably hundreds of thousands of EU nationals stripped of their rights overnight. Do you think other MPs are going to stand with the SNP on these amendments?
I hope, I don't know what other MPs will do, but I would hope they would recognise the situation that refugees have been placed in. People have become refugees through no fault of their own. Nobody chooses to be a refugee. Nobody makes that choice. And they certainly don't choose to have their families broken up, etc., you know. So they're in hard times, and I think it's incumbent upon us to show compassion at times like this, and to act in a compassionate and kind way. Some of these people have become refugees through wars not started by them. These are innocent folk, and the least we can do is treat people as that to begin with, and then let's see where we go after that.
Yes, definitely, Colin. At the end of the day, they're human beings. Andrew, we've spoke about these again on the show quite a lot of times. What's your take on the immigration bill?
Well, I'm concerned that I think in terms of the point as to whether other MPs will stand beside the SNP in Westminster, I think if we've learned anything over the last few years, it is that the Labour Party will abstain on anything. They are absolutely devoid of principle or any moral fibre, and so there is not. I don't think there is a bill upon which they would not abstain, and that's a really significant concern for me, because it makes it very difficult for any proper opposition to extreme legislation like this to be mounted. The House of Lords will always be overridden, especially in the context here of an English population who swallowed the right-wing press line before the last general election, hook, line and sinker, it would seem, and who will be perfectly happy to pick on those who are seeking asylum, those who are in need of our support and our help. The right-wing press in England needs its enemies to in order to operate. It needs its enemies in order to sell papers. So I'm very concerned, firstly, that the Labour Party in particular, will abstain on this, and so any meaningful opposition in the House of Commons will become impossible. There are only 59 SNP MPs, and moreover, that the whole direction of travel, both from the right-wing press and from the Tory government, it disregards immigrants and others as not being humans worthy of protection. Somebody in my circle referred to a worker who they'd come across as being an illegal, and I was visibly upset and managed not to resort to violence. But people are not illegal. People are people, and they deserve protection and they deserve respect. And that is something which is incumbent upon us all, not least politicians in the House of Commons.
Yeah, definitely, Andrew. There's nothing worse than people being described as illegal workers. At the end of the day, everybody's a human being. But yeah, I would have been quite angry as well with that one. Right, moving on to our next story, which is our very final story of the evening. The Scottish Greens call for climate justice commitment at the COP26. The Scottish Government must commit to international climate justice ahead of the COP26 summit in Glasgow, the Scottish Greens have said. The call comes during Global Climate Change Week, as a new report from the Stop Climate Chaos Coalition highlights the need for targeted financial support for countries in the global south who are most impacted by climate change. The Scottish Greens Environment spokesman, Mark Ruskell, MSP, said this report serves as an important reminder of the Scottish Government's international responsibilities when it comes to climate justice. The fact is that those most affected by the climate emergency are usually those who have done the least to cause it. The Scottish Government needs to bring more than boasts about targets to the COP26 next year. It needs to come with solutions to rapidly cut emissions at home, hard cash for targeted adaptation, funds for the most vulnerable countries. Now, Colm, I'm going to come to you in this because I want to get your opinion on this story in terms of the Scottish Greens call for climate justice commitment.
I think the phrase climate justice commitment is kind of sums up a lot of things. But yeah, while we sort of prattle on about politics and the rest of it, the climate emergency has not gone away, and it continues to get worse. And it's not going to go away, and we have to do stuff about this. We have to do it fast, but we do have to mitigate for, as you say, and it does seem to be that those who did the least to cause it are harmed the most by the climate emergency. I'd heard somebody told us one time that roundabout Scotland is one of the best places to live during the climate emergency because we still don't get hurricanes, we don't get the degree of flooding or deaths caused by climate change that we see in other parts of the world. We need to work globally to find ways to mitigate this and to correct the damage and stop it getting worse, first of all. And we need to accelerate that now or yesterday, actually, if we could. It hasn't gone away, and it has to stop getting worse first, and then we've got to move faster to fix it.
Definitely, Colm. Right, that's us all finished for this evening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. And thank you very much for Colm and Andrew for joining me, and thank you for watching and putting up with me in the hot seat tonight. Now, if you would love to join us here at Broadcasting Scotland, or even just help us for a wee donation, it's cheaper than a TV licence. There is the link at the bottom of the screen, please. We're all volunteers here and we work very hard. Also as well, we're always looking for more volunteers to come and help out. You can get involved by working behind the scenes, and you can also get involved by sitting in this hot seat. Trust me, I was terrified before I came on the show, and I was getting a bit disorientated with my earpiece, but we've got there in the end, and it's not that scary once you do it. So please get involved. And again, there's all the details at the bottom of the screen. And thank you, Colm, for joining us this evening. It has been a pleasure, and all the best in your campaign. And Andrew, thank you very much once again. It's lovely speaking to you again. And all it leaves me to say is thank you very much.